The courtroom hummed with the arrogant laughter of the wealthy. Julian Blackwood sat with his high-priced attorneys, a smug grin plastered on his face as he prepared to leave his wife, Eleanor, with absolutely nothing. He thought she was just a simple stay-at-home mother from a no-name village, utterly alone in the metropolis. He thought winning would be easy. He was wrong. The moment the courtroom doors swung open and a fleet of midnight black sedans pulled up outside, everything changed. Julian wasn't just divorcing a lonely housewife. He was declaring war on a legacy he never knew existed. And today, they had come to collect. The divorce proceedings of Blackwood versus Blackwood were taking place in the Supreme Judicial Court of Metropolis, a building that smelled of ancient oak and expensive desperation. To Julian Blackwood, the smell was sweet. It smelled like victory. Julian adjusted the cuffs of his tailored Savile Row suit, glancing at the reflection of his Vacheron chrono watch. He was a handsome man in the way cobras are handsome, sleek, predatory, and devoid of warmth. At 42, he was the CEO of Blackwood Dynamics, a company he had built, admittedly with the emotional support of his wife Eleanor, but he conveniently forgot that part today. He wasn't thinking about the late nights she stayed up helping him draft investment proposals or the way she had nursed him through his stress-induced migraines. He was thinking about Veronica, his 26-year-old marketing director, currently waiting for him in a penthouse suite at the Grand, and he was thinking about how much he enjoyed crushing people. "Look at her," Julian whispered to his lead counsel, Rupert Stone. Stone was a man known in legal circles as the executioner of Central because he didn't just win cases. He decimated the opposition. "She looks like she's about to hyperventilate. This will be over before the late news." Rupert Stone chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Standard operating procedure, Jules. We shatter her resolve. She signs the confidentiality agreement and the waiver for support, and she goes back to whatever forgotten hamlet you found her in. She has a pro bono attorney, for heaven's sake. A pro bono attorney against me." Across the aisle, Eleanor Blackwood sat alone. She wore a simple charcoal dress that had seen better days. Her auburn hair pulled back in a severe, practical knot. She looked exhausted. Her hands were folded on the empty table in front of her. Next to her sat a young, flustered-looking man named Marcus Allen. He was a court-appointed lawyer who looked like he had passed the bar about 3 weeks ago. He was shuffling papers nervously, dropping a fountain pen, picking it up, and dropping it again. "Mrs. Blackwood," Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. I really think we should have accepted the initial offer. 10,000 is better than a complete loss. Stone is a juggernaut. He's going to argue that you contributed nothing of value to the marriage and that you were, well, unfaithful." Eleanor didn't look at him. She kept her eyes fixed on the magistrate's bench. "I wasn't unfaithful, Marcus. You know that. Julian knows that." "It doesn't matter what the reality is," Marcus hissed, panic rising in his chest. "It matters what they can verify, or what they can invent. They have digitized images, Eleanor. Manipulated, perhaps, but images. They have sworn statements from staff you've never encountered. They are going to annihilate you." "Let them attempt it," Eleanor said softly. Marcus stared at her. For a woman about to be thrown onto the pavement without a dime to her name, she was bizarrely composed. It wasn't the calm of tranquility. It was the calm at the heart of a maelstrom. Julian leaned back, stretching his legs. He caught Eleanor's eye and sneered. He mouthed the word destitute. She didn't blink. She just observed him, her eyes dark and enigmatic. Magistrate Harold C. Bentley entered the room, his black vestments billowing. The bailiff called the court to order. Magistrate Bentley was a man who had witnessed everything, and he looked particularly jaded today. Another affluent husband discarding his foundational wife. It was a Wednesday ritual in Metropolis. "We are convened for the matter of Blackwood versus Blackwood," Magistrate Bentley droned, adjusting his spectacles. "Mr. Stone, you may commence your opening declaration." Stone stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't walk. He stalked. He approached the council rails, though there was no jury for this session, only the magistrate he performed for the audience in the gallery. "Your Honor," Stone began, his voice booming with affected indignation, "we are here today to sever a union that was predicated on deceit. My client, Mr. Julian Blackwood, is a luminary of technology, a man of veracity, a man who rose through sheer determination to construct a corporate realm. And who did he elevate with him? This woman. He pointed a finger at Eleanor like a loaded sidearm. Eleanor Blackwood, a woman from a small, unremarkable village in rural Vermont. A woman with minimal schooling, no lineage, and zero capital. My client, out of sheer magnanimity, married her. He offered her a life of unimaginable splendor, executive homes, luxury vehicles, designer attire, and how did she reciprocate? Stone paused for dramatic effect. The courtroom was silent. She reciprocated with sloth, with inadequacy, and ultimately with treachery. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the few onlookers, mostly journalists Julian had alerted to publicly shame Eleanor. We possess tangible proof, Your Honor, Stone continued, brandishing a thick dossier. Affidavits from resort employees, transactional records. While my client was toiling 18-hour shifts to sustain their household, Mrs. Blackwood was entertaining associates. Julian put on a facade of deep anguish, looking down at his hands. It was a performance deserving of an Emmy. We are petitioning for a full dissolution, Stone declared. We are asking that Mrs. Blackwood be denied any spousal maintenance. We are asking that she be evacuated from the matrimonial estate immediately. And furthermore, we are countersuing for character assassination, citing the extreme emotional trauma she has inflicted upon my client. Marcus, the young lawyer, looked like he was about to faint. He stood up, his knees visibly trembling. Objection, Your Honor. This is ludicrous. Eleanor, Mrs. Blackwood, has been a loyal partner for 12 years. Be seated, Mr. Allen, Magistrate Bentley sighed. You will be afforded your opportunity. Stone smirked at Marcus. The defense possesses nothing, Your Honor, because the defendant is nothing. She has no kin to vouch for her, no credibility witnesses, no resources. She is a fraudster who was apprehended. Julian leaned over to Stone as he sat down. Brilliant, Rupert. Truly brilliant. Did you observe her expression? She's paralyzed. She's finished, Stone whispered back. We'll have the documents notarized by 1:00 p.m. Then we proceed to lunch at L'Ambroisie. Eleanor sat perfectly still. She reached into her inexpensive clutch and pulled out a small, vibrating communication device, the kind utilized in surgical facilities or old-fashioned diners. It buzzed once, a harsh mechanical signal. She looked at the device, then at the chronometer on the wall. 10:05 a.m. exactly. Eleanor, Marcus whispered. What is that? Eleanor finally turned to her terror-stricken lawyer. A small, faint smile touched her lips. I informed Julian that I originated from a small village in Vermont. That detail was accurate, but I never specified who governed that village. Marcus blinked. What? I told him I was disconnected from my family because they were temperamental. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining a sudden metallic resolve. I didn't inform him I departed because I wanted to ascertain if anyone could genuinely care for me and not for my patrimonial title. Eleanor, what are you implying? He failed the examination, Marcus. Eleanor stood up. She didn't seek authorization. She simply rose, her stance altering instantaneously. The weariness evaporated. Her shoulders straightened. She looked taller, sharper, formidable. Your Honor, Eleanor said, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the courtroom. It wasn't the voice of a defeated wife. It was the voice of someone accustomed to issuing mandates that were instantly executed. Bentley looked over his glasses, irritated. Mrs. Blackwood, your representative will speak for you. My representative has performed an admirable service given the falsehoods he was supplied by the opposition, Eleanor interrupted calmly. But my actual legal team has just gained access to the structure. I petitioned for a brief adjournment to permit their entry to the courtroom. Julian laughed out loud. Legal team? What legal team? The cashier from the supermarket? Stone rolled his eyes. Your Honor, this constitutes a delay tactic. She is without means. The adjournment is refused, Magistrate Bentley said, banging his gavel. Be seated, Mrs. Blackwood. Boom! The sound wasn't meteorological. It was the heavy double doors at the rear of the courtroom, being thrust open with sufficient force to vibrate the window panes. Every head in the room pivoted. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The air grew dense, charged with a sudden, overwhelming pressure. Standing in the doorway were 8 individuals. They were not court personnel. They were not local constables. They were attired in black security uniforms, impeccable and unnerving, with comms wires coiling down their necks. They moved with a synchronized smoothness that hinted at elite tactical training. They stepped aside, forming a passage. Julian frowned, his laughter dissolving in his throat. Who in the abyss are these individuals? Through the corridor of guards walked a man and a woman. The man was older, perhaps in his late 60s, but he possessed an aura of vigor that made him seem timeless. He wore a graphite suit that was worth more than Julian's vehicle. He had silver hair, frigid indigo eyes, and he carried a platinum-tipped walking stick, not because he required it, but because it resembled an implement of coercion. The woman beside him was younger, strikingly beautiful, with acute features that mirrored Eleanor's. She wore an ivory power suit that looked like plate armor. She carried a leather portfolio embossed with a gold emblem, a crest of an eagle grasping a sword. Behind them came a phalanx of legal counsel, not the desperate, perspiring attorneys of the metropolis lower circuits. These were the predators that consumed other predators. There were 15 of them, marching in perfect formation, carrying towers of documentation. "What is the significance of this intrusion?" Magistrate Bentley demanded, though his voice trembled slightly. "You cannot simply storm into my courtroom." The silver-haired man stopped in the center of the aisle. He looked at the magistrate, then at Julian. He didn't look at Julian like a person. He looked at him like a blemish on the floor. "My sincerest apologies, Your Honor," the man said. His voice was profound, resonant, and demanded absolute stillness. "We were detained by your city's atrocious vehicular congestion. I am Elias Sterling." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when ordnance is dropped but has yet to detonate. Julian's face went ashen. He recognized that name. Everyone in finance recognized that name. Sterling. The Sterlings weren't just affluent. They were the cornerstone of the global infrastructure. They owned rare earth metals. They owned aerospace. They owned telecommunications. And rumor had it they influenced entire governments. They were ancestral wealth that had existed before nations had demarcated boundaries. "Elias Sterling," Rupert Stone stammered, standing up. The industrialist, and I," the woman in the ivory suit said, stepping forward, "am Cassandra Sterling Thorne, senior partner at Thorne and Associates." Stone choked. Thorne and Associates was the most formidable legal institution in the Eastern Hemisphere. They managed international diplomacy, treaties, and the dissolutions of royal couples. They did not appear in Supreme Court for a tech CEO. "We are present to represent the respondent," Elias Sterling said, turning his gaze to Eleanor. His cold eyes softened instantly. "Hello, darling daughter." Eleanor stepped out from behind her table. She walked past a petrified Marcus Allen and embraced the older man. "Hello, father." "Father!" Julian shrieked. He stood up so fast his chair overturned. "That is inconceivable. She is Eleanor Jones from Vermont." Elias Sterling released his daughter and turned slowly to confront Julian. The expression of fondness vanished, replaced by a glacial loathing. "She is Eleanor Sterling," Elias corrected, his voice deepening an octave. "She utilized her mother's maiden name, Jones, because she desired an uncomplicated existence. She wanted to discover a man who loved her, not her patrimony. She believed she found that man in you." Elias took a step toward Julian. The security detail tensed, ready to intervene, but Elias simply leaned on his walking stick. "We afforded her 12 years, Mr. Blackwood. 12 years to play house. We remained distant, as she requested. We allowed her to reside in your mediocre apartments. We allowed her to operate your unremarkable automobiles. But then you elected to wound her." Cassandra Eleanor's sister slammed her portfolio onto the defense table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "You didn't merely file for dissolution, Julian," Cassandra said, opening the case. "You endeavored to humiliate her. You fabricated material evidence. You attempted to leave a Sterling destitute." She pulled out a document and held it up. This is a petition to nullify your fraudulent assertions, Cassandra announced. And this, she pulled out a second, substantially thicker document, is a counter-indictment. Counter-indictment? Stone managed to croak. On what basis? Fraud? Cassandra listed, ticking off fingers. Misappropriation of corporate assets, insider trading violations, cohabitation outside of marriage, and, oh yes, conspiracy to deceive a federal judicial officer. Julian felt the room spinning. You're bluffing. Eleanor is insignificant. She prepared my dinners. She managed my household. She managed your household, Elias said, his voice dripping with revulsion. Because she loved you, not because she was obligated to. You treated a sovereign like a domestic servant, and you were too obtuse to recognize the disparity. Magistrate Bentley, comprehending the severity of the situation, cleared his throat. Mr. Sterling, while I acknowledge your entrance, you cannot simply commandeer proceedings. Miss Sterling Thorne, you must officially file an appearance. Already submitted electronically, Your Honor. 4 minutes ago, Cassandra said smoothly, along with a request to escalate this matter to the High Chancery Court due to the extensive complexities of the assets involved. Assets? Julian scoffed, trying to reclaim his composure. I am the one with the assets. She possesses nothing. Eleanor spoke then. Her voice was serene, but it carried to every extremity of the room. Julian, she said, who do you believe provided the initial capital for Blackwood Dynamics? Julian blinked. Venture capitalists, a syndicate termed G-Force Holdings. G-Force, Eleanor repeated. G as in Grafton. Grafton Trust. Julian froze. My blind trust, Eleanor said simply. I authorized the investment 12 years ago. I control 49% of your corporation through holding entities. My family controls an additional 2%. She smiled a cold, sharp smile that matched her father's. That signifies we control 51%. I'm not just your wife, Julian. I'm your superior. The color drained from Julian's face so utterly he resembled a marble bust. Stone looked like he was suffering a cardiac episode. We are freezing all financial activities of Blackwood Dynamics effective instantaneously, Cassandra announced, handing a document to the bailiff. We are also serving you with a writ of ejectment for the executive apartment. The structure is owned by Sterling Global Realties. You have 24 hours to depart. You are incapable of doing this, Julian screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Eleanor. I am the CEO. I constructed that corporation with my ingenuity and my patience, Eleanor said, both of which have been depleted. Elias Sterling tapped his walking stick on the floor. Your Honor, I strongly recommend a recess. My son-in-law appears to be in urgent need of contacting his mistress and informing her he is unable to finance her accommodation any longer. The courtroom erupted into pandemonium. Reporters were frantically tapping on their phones. Marcus Allen was staring at Eleanor with his jaw agape. Magistrate Bentley banged his gavel. Order! Order! We will observe a 90-minute recess. As the magistrate exited, Julian slumped into his seat. He looked up at Eleanor, searching for the woman who used to prepare his espresso and soothe his shoulders. She was absent. In her place was an adversary backed by a legion. Eleanor leaned across the aisle. You desired a conflict, Julian, she whispered. The Sterlings do not suffer defeats. We terminate the hostilities. She turned and walked out, flanked by her father, her sister, and the wall of security detail. Julian was left isolated in the din, the aroma of his expensive fragrance now acrid with the odor of panic. The 90-minute recess was barely 15 minutes old, and Julian Blackwood was already violating the speed limit in his Ferrari Roma, navigating metropolis traffic with the desperation of a cornered predator. His hands convulsed on the steering wheel. It's an illusion, he repeated to himself relentlessly. It must be an illusion. No one conceals being a multi-billionaire for 12 years. No one. He fumbled for his cellular device, dialing Oliver Kent. No, wait, Oliver Banks. He had to be careful with names. His consciousness was fragmented. Oliver Banks was his chief financial officer, the man who knew the location of all the financial improprieties. Oliver, Julian screamed the moment the connection was established. Where are you? I'm at the headquarters, Julian. Listen, you shouldn't approach the building. Oliver's voice sounded peculiar, faint, distressed. I'm the CEO. I have autonomy. Listen to me. I need you to initiate the transfer of the foreign accounts, the Monaco deposits, the Geneva reserves. Relocate everything to the encrypted wallets we discussed. Now. There was an extended silence on the other end. Oliver, did you comprehend my instruction? I cannot execute that, Julian. Why in the inferno not? Because, Oliver whispered it, they are already present. The line went dead. Julian slammed the phone onto the passenger seat. He floored the accelerator, disregarding a traffic signal. He needed to reach the core server room. If he could simply obliterate the records, the documentation of the embezzlement he'd been executing for 5 years to fund his profligate lifestyle and Veronica's extravagant tastes, he might endure this. He could allege the Sterlings were orchestrating a hostile corporate seizure based on fabrications. He screeched into the subsurface parking facility of Blackwood Dynamics. He leaped out of the car, racing toward the exclusive lift that led directly to the 50th floor. He jammed his thumb against the biometric sensor. Beep, 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 access denied. Julian glared at the small red indicator. He scrubbed his thumb on his jacket and attempted again. Access denied. User credentials invalid. Blast it! He kicked the metallic doors. Mr. Blackwood. Julian spun around. 2 uniformed security officers, men he had employed, men whose salaries he authorized, were standing there, but they weren't smiling. They were standing with their arms folded, looking at him with a blend of pity and detached professionalism. Activate this lift, Julian barked. The system is malfunctioning. It is not a malfunction, sir, the taller guard said. We have been directed to escort you to the executive conference suite. Visitor authorization only. Visitor! Julian's neck veins bulged. I am the proprietor of this edifice. This way, sir. They flanked him efficiently, marching him to the secondary service elevator. The degradation burned hotter than any inferno. Julian Blackwood dragged through the auxiliary entrance of his own domain. When the elevator doors opened on the 50th floor, the office was eerily silent. Typically, it was vibrant with software architects and investment analysts. Now everyone was at their workstations, heads bowed, feigning productivity. But Julian could sense their scrutiny. They were informed. The rumor network propagated faster than light. The double glass doors of the boardroom were frosted, but he could perceive figures moving inside. He shoved past the guards and threw the doors open. The scene before him paralyzed him instantly. The extended mahogany table was fully occupied. The entire executive board was present. They were men and women Julian had intimidated, seduced, and manipulated for years. Usually they looked at him with subservience. Today they would not meet his gaze. At the head of the table, his chair, sat Eleanor. She wasn't wearing the charcoal dress from the courtroom anymore. In the 90 minutes since they had departed, she had changed. She wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue blazer, sharp and commanding, her hair loose and cascading over her shoulders. She looked comfortable in the leather chair. She looked like she belonged there. To her right sat Elias Sterling, looking bored as he reviewed a stack of financial reports. To her left was Cassandra, tapping away on a specialized tablet. Standing in the corner, looking sallow and sweating profusely, was Oliver Banks, the CFO. You are occupying my seat, Julian snarled, striding forward. I am occupying the chairman's seat, Eleanor corrected calmly. She didn't stand up. She didn't recoil. And since I represent the majority's shareholding interest as of 45 minutes prior, this is my designated position. You cannot simply assume control. Julian slammed his hands on the table. I hold a contract. I possess executive tenure protection. Article 18, Section E of your employment accord, Cassandra spoke up without looking up from her tablet. The CEO may be terminated immediately and without financial settlement in the contingency of gross malfeasance or documented criminal negligence. I have perpetrated nothing illegal, Julian lied, his eyes darting to Oliver. Eleanor picked up a file from the table and slid it across the mahogany surface. It stopped flawlessly at the edge directly in front of Julian. Oliver disclosed everything, Julian, Eleanor said softly. The interior design expenses for the executive apartment that were billed as server infrastructure upgrades. The corporate aircraft excursions to Mykonos documented as client development. The high-end timepiece receipts for Veronica categorized as general office consumables. Julian glared at Oliver. You traitor. I have a family, Alex, Oliver stammered, wiping perspiration from his forehead. Mr. Sterling's auditors identified the discrepancies in 10 minutes. They offered me indemnity if I cooperated. I sincerely apologize. Julian felt the floor tilting. So what? You discharged me. I still retain my equity shares. I possess 30% of this corporation. Elias Sterling finally looked up. He took off his reading glasses and folded them slowly. In reality, you do not, Elias said. His voice was gravel and thunder. You secured a substantial line of credit against your equity 3 years ago to settle your catastrophic gambling obligations in Monte Carlo. Do you recollect that? You utilized your shares as collateral. Julian froze. He had hoped that detail was permanently obscured. The credit was held by a private equity consortium called Centurion Capital. Elias continued, guess who holds ownership of Centurion? Julian didn't reply. He couldn't breathe. I do, Elias smiled, and since you defaulted on your last 2 margin maintenance calls, I exercised the right of foreclosure on the collateral this morning. Your shares are now vested in my name. Julian stumbled back, gripping the rear of a chair for stability. This is an elaborate scheme. You prearranged this. You entrapped me. I did not entrap you, Julian, Eleanor said, standing up. She walked around the table until she was standing mere inches from him. Her eyes were clear, devoid of the apprehension he used to witness in them. I provided you with a fallback. I compensated for your shortcomings. I utilized my personal dividends to seal the fiscal breaches you excavated in the corporate accounts because I genuinely desired your success. I wanted to believe you were merely strained, not fundamentally depraved. She leaned in close. But then you looked at me across the breakfast bar last week and declared that I was a financial burden. You declared that I was impeding your progress. Eleanor's voice trembled slightly, not with sorrow, but with controlled fury. You yearn to soar, Julian. Excellent. Achieve flight, but I am confiscating the wings I personally purchased for you. Eleanor turned to the board. I call for an immediate vote to dismiss Julian Blackwood as CEO, effective immediately, pending a rigorous criminal investigation into the allegations of fraud and embezzlement. Seconded, said a board member, who Julian considered a dependable associate. All in favor? Every hand in the room went up, even Oliver's. Motion passed, Eleanor said. She looked at the security guards. Kindly escort Mr. Blackwood off the premises. He is prohibited from removing any personal effects from his office. His belongings will be securely boxed and delivered to, well, wherever he ultimately establishes residence. Eleanor, wait, Julian pleaded, his arrogance finally shattering into raw panic. He reached for her arm. The guard stepped in, gripping Julian's wrist in a vice-like grasp. Do not make physical contact with her, sir. Eleanor, please. We can negotiate this. I was under duress. I committed lapses. I love you. Eleanor looked at him. For a fraction of a second, Julian saw a glimmer of the woman who had loved him for 12 years. But then he saw the impenetrable steel door of the Sterling vault slam shut in her eyes. You do not love me, Julian, she said. You cherish the delusion that you were fundamentally superior to me. Goodbye. She turned her back on him. Remove him from this location, Elias Sterling ordered. As Julian was forcibly removed from the boardroom, shouting vulgarities, Eleanor didn't look back. She sat down in the CEO's chair, inhaled deeply, and looked at the board. Now, she said, let's commence the work of rectifying this catastrophe. The pavement outside Blackwood Dynamics was frigid. It was a crisp metropolis afternoon, but to Julian it felt like the Antarctic. He stood there, absent his overcoat, absent his executive bag, absent his dignity. The security staff had literally ejected him through the revolving doors. Bystanders were staring, some were pointing. Julian realized with a sudden jolt of terror that someone was recording him with a mobile phone. He needed to escape. He needed an alcoholic beverage. He needed a coherent strategy. He patted his pockets. He still possessed his phone and his wallet. That was something. He hailed a street taxi. He, Julian Blackwood, taking a common yellow cab like a mundane visitor. The Grand Hotel, he snapped at the driver. He dialed Veronica. She was his emergency cord now. She was astute. She was well-connected. And she, unlike Eleanor, grasped the realm of excessive risk. They could abscond from the nation. He had secreted away some reserve cash, surely. Julian, Veronica answered on the first ring. What is your location? I've been waiting for 3 hours. The private label champagne is losing its chill. Disregard the champagne, Julian barked, his voice trembling. Secure your possessions. We are leaving. Leaving? What are you communicating? Did you succeed? It's convoluted. Just pack. I will arrive in 5 minutes. He terminated the call. He checked his financial application on his phone. He needed to execute a transfer of whatever liquid funds he possessed in his current account to a disposable debit card before the freeze took effect. He logged in. Balance, 0. He blinked. He refreshed the display. Balance, negative 320 overdraft. What? He screamed, startling the cab driver. That is not possible. There was $250,000 in there this morning. He tapped on the transaction history. One enormous transfer labeled, Court-mandated asset seizure. Supreme Court docket 51432. No, no, no. The cab pulled up to the Grand. That will be $35.50, the driver said. Julian handed over his solid platinum card. The driver swiped it on his portable terminal. Declined. Attempt it again, Julian snapped. It's a platinum card. It has unlimited spending power. It is declined, friend. Provide another form of payment. Julian tried his Amex, declined. His Visa, declined. The driver turned around, his eyes narrowing. Do you have physical currency? Julian checked his wallet. He had a single $50 note. He hurled it at the driver. Retain the remainder. He scrambled out of the cab and raced into the foyer. The extravagance of the Grand, usually soothing, now felt derisive. He sprinted to the lifts and ascended to the suite. He burst into the room. Veronica was reclining on the velvet sofa, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, annoyed, but her expression shifted when she observed him. He was disheveled, perspiring, his necktie askew. Good heavens, Julian, she said. You appear devastated. What transpired? They froze the entire network of accounts, Julian gasped, pacing the room. They possessed intimate knowledge of everything, Eleanor. She is not the person we imagined her to be. Veronica frowned. What do you mean? She's the commoner from Vermont. She is a sterling. Veronica dropped her phone. It landed on the thick carpet with a soft thud. A sterling, like the Sterlings. Yes, her father is Elias Sterling. They entrapped me. They seized the corporation. They seized the residence. They confiscated everything. He grabbed Veronica's shoulders. But we can rectify this. You have reserves, correct? We can flee to the Caribbean. I can reconstruct. I maintain my contacts. Veronica stared at him. Slowly, she reached up and removed his hands from her shoulders. She stood up and took a step back. You are saying you lost the corporation? She asked, her voice dangerously calm. They pilfered it, but I will reclaim it. I require you to underwrite us for a few weeks. Veronica laughed. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. It was a cold, malicious sound that reminded him of Rupert Stone. Underwrite us, she repeated. Julian, do you understand the fundamental reason I'm involved with you? Because we are kindred spirits, Julian said, though it sounded hollow even to him. Because we possess mutual understanding. I am involved with you because you purchased me a diamond cuff last Tuesday, Veronica said flatly. I am involved with you because you promised to appoint me Vice President of Global Strategy. I am involved with you because you embody success. She looked him up and down, curling her lip in disgust. But at this precise moment, you resemble a failure, a destitute failure. Veronica, don't Veronica me. You're asserting you are contesting the Sterlings? You are utterly ruined, Julian. They will pulverize you into dust, and I refuse to soil my Chanel shoes with debris. She walked over to the bed, grabbed her handbag, and slung it over her shoulder. Where are you going? Julian asked, his voice cracking. Away. I have a planned engagement with that private equity manager, Marcus. He's been soliciting me for months. I declined previously because you were the superior prospect. She shrugged. Now you are merely bait. You cannot abandon me. I left my wife for you, and she turned out to be a multi-billionaire. Veronica scoffed, opening the door. It appears you are the imbecile, Julian. Do not initiate contact. She slammed the door. Julian stood in the silence of the hotel suite. He was solitary, truly solitary. A rap at the door made him recoil. A glimmer of hope flared in his chest. Veronica returned. He rushed to open it. It wasn't Veronica. It was Cassandra Sterling Thorne. She was flanked by two Metropolitan Police detectives. Mr. Blackwood, Cassandra said, her voice crisp and professionally detached. She held out a legal envelope. What is this? Julian whispered. I endeavored to intercept you at the headquarters, but you departed with such haste, Cassandra said. This contains a summons and a custodial warrant. Warrant? Aggravated theft? Securities fraud? Embezzlement. Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. My father harbors an extreme dislike for individuals who pilfer from his family. We conducted a complete forensic accounting during the recess. It appears you absconded with approximately $8 million from the corporate accounts over the past 5 years. The police detective stepped forward. Julian Blackwood, you are hereby placed under arrest. No, Julian whimpered as the metallic restraints clicked around his wrists. This cannot be reality. Oh, it is exceptionally real, Cassandra said, watching as the officers pivoted him around. And Julian, the hotel director requested me to inform you that your credit authorization for the suite was declined. They will be retaining your luggage until payment is remitted. I possess nothing, Julian screamed as he was led down the corridor past astonished hotel guests. I possess nothing. Cassandra watched him depart, then pulled out her phone. She dialed a number. Hello, Father, she said. The action is complete. He is in official custody. Inform Eleanor she can return to the estate. The pest management service is concluded. Metropolis Detention Center was a stark contrast to the executive apartment overlooking Central Park. The air smelled of industrial disinfectant and stale human occupancy. For Julian Blackwood, the 72 hours he endured in holding were an eternity. When he finally secured bail, posted by a questionable acquaintance from his former gambling days, who demanded a usurious 50% interest rate, Julian emerged into the afternoon sunlight, resembling a specter. His tailored suit was severely wrinkled, his beard was graying, and his eyes were intensely bloodshot. He did not have his Ferrari. He did not have his personal chauffeur. He had a shared ride service waiting for him, paid for with a prepaid digital card he had managed to obtain. Transport me to the economy suites in Brooklyn, Julian muttered, sliding into the back seat of the aging sedan. He had one strategy remaining to deploy. The legal confrontation was a guaranteed loss. The Sterling lawyers were already dissecting his life with surgical precision. But Julian knew something the Sterlings did not: the inherent power of a compelling narrative of victimhood. In the cramped, musty motel room, Julian established his operational center. He could no longer afford Rupert Stone. Stone wouldn't even accept his calls. Instead, Julian had retained Gregory Finch, a lawyer whose office was situated above a laundromat in Queens and who advertised on the backside of municipal transit benches. So, this is the tactical approach, Finch said, chewing on a plastic toothpick. He was a diminutive man with a severe comb-over and a suit that was clearly 2 sizes too large. We cannot prevail on the fraud charges. The paper trail is too deep. But we can prevail in the court of popular opinion. The Sterlings are arrogant tyrants. You are the impoverished husband who was systematically deceived. Deceived? Julian scoffed, pacing the room. I embezzled $8 million, Gregory. Allegedly, Finch corrected, but consider this perspective. Eleanor fabricated her entire identity for 12 years. That constitutes fraud by concealment. She laid a trap for you. She pretended to be impoverished so she could administer a test to you. That is profound psychological abuse. People despise the super rich, Julian. They despise the Sterlings. If we articulate this correctly, you are the casualty of a cruel aristocratic family's power games. Julian ceased pacing. A slow, unsettling smile spread across his face. I am the victim. Precisely. We approach the media. We tell them she orchestrated your downfall. We tell them you only relocated the funds to safeguard the corporation because you suspected a hostile corporate acquisition, which technically she did successfully execute. The following morning, Julian Blackwood sat opposite eager news presenter Brenda Walsh on the Morning Sentinel, a high-rated national television program. He wore a simple, unbranded merino sweater, looking utterly humble and profoundly heartbroken. I was completely unaware of your true identity, Julian said, dabbing away a synthetic tear. I married Eleanor Jones. I loved Eleanor Jones. For 12 years, I exhausted myself to provide for us. And throughout that time, she was mocking me. She was sitting on an immense fortune, observing my struggle with emotional stress, observing me develop ulcers from existential worry. The interviewer leaned in, deeply empathetic. And the criminal embezzlement accusations? A complete misunderstanding, Julian lied smoothly. I was attempting to move capital to secure it because I detected financial anomalies. I had no comprehension that the anomalies were her, the Sterlings. They crush individuals for entertainment. I am merely a man from modest origins who attempted to build a technology empire, and they systematically disassembled it all because I did not successfully pass their twisted, sick little test. The interview achieved immediate viral status. Within hours, the hashtag #JusticeForJulian was dominating social media. Internet researchers began intensely scrutinizing the Sterling family history, portraying them as Illuminati-level conspirators who toyed with ordinary citizens. The public narrative shifted dramatically. Julian wasn't the duplicitous embezzler. He was the pawn in a billionaire's twisted social experiment. In the executive penthouse of the Sterling estate, Elias watched the plasma screen with an expression like a gathering thunderstorm. I shall acquire that broadcast network and terminate every single employee, Elias growled, reaching for his dedicated cellular device. No, father, Eleanor said. She was sitting by the expansive window, sipping a delicate infusion of hibiscus tea. She looked composed, but her eyes were razor sharp. Allow him to speak. Let him construct his fragile platform. He is defaming the family honor, Cassandra yelled, pacing the room agitatedly. He is making us appear like moral monsters. The investment community is panicking. Our stock valuation dropped 3 points this morning. Julian is a textbook narcissist, Eleanor said quietly. He believes he is prevailing because people are listening to his fabricated story. But he is overlooking one crucial factor. What is that? He forgets that I cohabited with him for 12 years. Eleanor turned to her sister. I know the location of his most carefully concealed secrets, not the fiscal ones, the actual ones. Eleanor stood up. Mobilize the legal team. He demands a public spectacle. We shall grant him one, arrange a formal deposition, live broadcast it. He craves transparency. Let us provide him with a definitive version. Cassandra grinned, a flash of predatory excitement. I thoroughly enjoy it when you become assertive. I am not becoming assertive, Cass, Eleanor replied, walking toward the door. I am achieving complete parity. The deposition was formally scheduled to occur 3 weeks later in a neutral executive conference suite at the Four Seasons Hotel. Because of the intense media saturation Julian had engineered, the magistrate had consented to an unusual provision. Portions of the sworn testimony could be released to the press, ostensibly to guarantee transparency given the high-profile allegations of corporate entrapment. Julian walked in with Gregory Finch feeling invincible. He possessed the sympathy of the masses. He had a crowdfunding campaign for his legal expenses that had accumulated $75,000 from benevolent strangers. He had utterly internalized his own lie. Now Eleanor sat opposite him. She was flanked by Cassandra and her father's chief litigator, a man named Robert Thorne. Mr. Blackwood, Robert Thorne began, activating the video recording apparatus. You have stated publicly and under oath that you were completely unaware of your wife's immense wealth and that you only absconded with corporate funds in a bid to protect the corporate assets. Is that an accurate representation? That is unequivocally accurate, Julian said, leaning into the microphone. I was attempting to rescue the corporation from what I perceived to be external financial raiders. I had no conception that my wife was the financial raider. And you claim you were a devoted, affectionate husband who was the subject of emotional manipulation? Absolutely. I deeply loved Eleanor Seymour. I would have sacrificed everything for her well-being. Eleanor didn't react. She simply slid a small USB storage device across the table to the court stenographer. Exhibit A, Eleanor said softly. Gregory Finch frowned. What is the nature of this object? We were not given prior notification of digital evidence. It was acquired yesterday, Eleanor said, from the cloud server linked to your personal mobile device, Julian. You truly should have modified your access code after I vacated the residence. Password 4-6 is hardly impenetrable. Julian paled. That constitutes a profound breach of privacy. It constitutes corporate property, Eleanor corrected. The mobile device was procured and maintained by Blackwood Dynamics. The data rightfully belongs to me. Robert Thorne inserted the drive into a laptop connected to a vast monitor on the wall. Let us commence playback of file voice memo NOV17. The room filled with faint electronic static, and then Julian's voice resonated, crystal clear. He wasn't addressing Eleanor. He was addressing Veronica. I must confess, Ronnie, it's almost insultingly effortless. The simpleton doesn't suspect a solitary thing. I just authorized the wire transfer for another $3 million. I plan to systematically drain this corporation dry, declare immediate insolvency, and saddle Eleanor with the insurmountable debt. She is so pathetically desperate for my validation, she will notarize anything. I am profoundly looking forward to discarding her and commencing a life of genuine excitement. The silence in the room was crushing. Julian's mouth opened and closed mechanically, like a landed fish. The victim narrative he had invested weeks constructing evaporated in 10 searing seconds. And let us examine this specific item, Eleanor said, gesturing toward the screen. An email correspondence chain materialized. It was between Julian and a notorious corporate asset stripper. Subject: liquidating Eleanor's trust. Body: once I effectively strip the liquid assets, you can purchase the shell entity for a pittance. I will ensure the wife absorbs the liability for the upcoming IRS audit. She is utterly clueless. I urgently require the liquid capital to cover the overwhelming gambling losses in Macau. Gregory Finch closed his notebook with a decisive snap. He looked at Julian with unconcealed disgust. You assured me you were blameless. Julian stammered. Those are sophisticated forgeries, AI generated. They have been authenticated by 3 independent digital forensics corporations, Cassandra interrupted. And we possess the authenticated promissory notes from the Venetian Macau that precisely correspond to the transaction dates. Eleanor leaned forward. The cameras were actively recording. She looked directly at Julian, her eyes burning with a cold, indisputable truth. You were not the victim, Julian. You were the opportunist. You didn't merely steal my personal funds. You stole 12 years of my finite existence. You conditioned me to believe I was insufficient, unintelligent, undesirable. You systematically dismantled my self-worth so that you could feel artificially significant. She stood up, metaphorically towering over him. But here is the unexpected consequence you failed to anticipate. You stated you wanted to burden me with the corporate debt. The Sterling auditors discovered a contractual stipulation in the corporate bylaws you personally drafted 5 years ago to protect your interests. It legally states that any corporate officer found guilty of fraud is held personally and financially liable for all existing corporate debts. Eleanor smiled. Blackwood Dynamics is currently indebted to G-Force Holdings for $60 million. Since you are the individual who committed the fraud, the debt is no longer the corporation's burden. It is yours. Julian felt the blood completely abandon his head. $60 million plus accruing interest and statutory penalties, Cassandra added cheerfully. You will be incarcerated, Julian, Eleanor said, her voice final. And when you are eventually released, you will dedicate the remainder of your life to financially compensating me. Every single paycheck, every solitary coin. You will never possess independent ownership of anything again. You are not just impoverished. You are contractually obligated to me. Julian looked at the camera, then at his lawyer. Finch stood up. I am formally resigning as your legal counsel, Finch said. I do not represent individuals who commit perjury. You cannot abandon me, Julian shrieked, grasping Finch's sleeve. They are going to destroy me. No, Julian, Eleanor said, turning to depart. We are not going to destroy you. We are going to permit you to live the very existence you were so terrified of. You are going to be penniless. You are going to be a non-entity, and the entire world will know precisely who you truly are. Eleanor walked out of the conference room. As the door swung shut, Julian collapsed onto the table, openly sobbing. It wasn't the fabricated tears of the television interview. It was the guttural, petrified sound of a man who realized he had plummeted from the apex of the world and impacted every single branch on the catastrophic descent. 8 months had elapsed since the pivotal deposition that irrevocably demolished Julian Blackwood's life. The overwhelming media attention had finally subsided, replaced by a sullen acceptance of his confirmed guilt. The hashtag #Justice for Julian had completely disappeared, replaced by widespread internet mockery of his tearful public meltdown and the irrefutable revelation of his cruel transactional emails. The world had irrevocably moved forward, but for Julian, time had reached a permanent standstill. The formal sentencing hearing was conducted in the same courthouse where Julian had once audaciously laughed at the prospect of divorcing Eleanor, believing he held every advantage. But this time the room wasn't populated with his exorbitant lawyers or fawning subordinates. It was filled with the oppressive silence of a predetermined outcome. Julian stood before Magistrate Bentley. He wore an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit, now the compulsory attire for federal detainees. The prison barber had closely shaven his head, revealing the scalp of a man who looked 20 years beyond his 42 years of age. He had lost 40 pounds. His complexion was sallow. His posture was utterly defeated. His eyes were vacant, darting neurotically around the room, still searching for a miracle savior that was definitively not arriving. Eleanor sat in the public gallery, flanked by her father and Cassandra. She wore a pristine ivory dress, simple yet undeniably powerful, a stark contrast to the drab charcoal she had worn 8 months prior. She no longer looked like a victim. She looked like a conqueror. She looked like aristocracy. Julian Blackwood, Magistrate Bentley said, looking down from the bench with zero visible empathy. The magistrate adjusted his spectacles, reading from the imposing dossier before him. You have formally entered a plea of guilty to 4 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of embezzlement, and 1 count of deliberate perjury. You profoundly violated the trust of your investors, your employees, and most grievously, your partner in marriage. Julian did not speak. He merely stared at the floor, his hands trembling within the constraints of the handcuffs. The prosecution has vehemently advocated for the statutory maximum sentence, the magistrate continued, his voice resonating in the hushed room. And quite frankly, I perceive no justifiable rationale for a reduction. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in federal correctional facility. A collective gasp went through the handful of journalists in the back row. 20 years. It was an epic in the financial sector. By the time he achieved parole, the world would be fundamentally unrecognizable. Furthermore, the magistrate added, peering over his glasses, restitution is officially mandated at $63 million payable to Blackwood Dynamics and its ultimate parent entity, G-Force Holdings. Your readily available assets have already been systematically liquidated, yielding an approximate total of $4 million. The remainder will be legally garnished from any future earned income until the debt obligation is fully satisfied. The gavel descended. Bang! It sounded like the conclusive sealing of a tomb. As the bailiffs moved to physically escort him away, Julian pivoted. He looked at Eleanor for the first time in 8 months. He did not look hostile or manipulative. He did not look like the predator who consumed lesser individuals for sport. He simply looked desolate, a broken man realizing he had entirely broken himself. Eleanor, he rasped, his voice rough from disuse. I am profoundly sorry. Eleanor stood up. She walked to the ornamental railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. She looked at the man she had irretrievably wasted a decade of her life on. She searched for the anger, the visceral hatred, the specific desire for retribution. But she found none of it. All she felt was a distant, hollow pity. "I am aware that you are, Julian," she said softly. "You are sorry that you were caught red-handed." "No, he choked back a sob, tears streaming down his face. "I possessed everything. I possessed you. Why was I so pathologically foolish?" "Because you fundamentally believed power was a finite resource you had to violently seize from others," Eleanor said, her voice clear and strong. "You never grasped that true power is the authority you willingly bestow. I conferred everything upon you, Julian. I gave you my loyalty, my complete faith, and the resources of my family. And you contemptuously discarded it all for a shallow, fleeting fantasy." She turned to leave. "Eleanor," he called out, desperation seeping back into his tone as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. Will you ever come to visit me?" Eleanor paused. She looked at her father, who offered her a gentle, supportive nod, leaning on his platinum-tipped walking stick. She looked at her sister, who was actively checking her watch, poised to conquer the next major corporate challenge. Then she looked back at Julian one last, conclusive time. "No, Julian," she said. "I have an entire corporation to strategically manage and a life to wholeheartedly live. Goodbye." She walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind her with a sound of irreversible finality. Outside, the air was crisp and invigorating. It was late spring in Metropolis. The trees were blossoming and the city felt profoundly alive. The paparazzi were waiting at the base of the steps, cameras flashing incessantly, shouting inquiries. "Mrs. Blackwood! Mrs. Blackwood! What is your emotional state? Is it confirmed that you are officially assuming the role of permanent CEO? What major expansion is next for the Sterling Empire?" Eleanor stopped at the bottom of the steps. She put on her expensive dark sunglasses, shielding her eyes from the intense glare. She looked at the sea of microphones. "My full name," she said, smiling confidently for the cameras, "is Eleanor Sterling. And what is next? Everything." She got into the waiting armored limousine where her father was pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You performed admirably, my child," Elias said, clinking his glass against hers. "You handled him with dignity and grace. Far better than I would have. I would have likely bought the entire correctional facility and systematically disabled the climate control." Eleanor laughed, a genuine, joyful sound. "That will not be necessary, Father. The prospect of living with his own monumental failure will serve as sufficient penalty." "So," Cassandra asked, flipping open her laptop as the car merged seamlessly into traffic, "we have an executive board meeting scheduled at 3:00 p.m. The European markets are opening. We must finalize the discussion regarding the acquisition in Berlin. The projected figures are extremely promising, but the operation demands a steady, uncompromising hand at the helm." Eleanor leaned back, closing her eyes for a brief moment. She thought of the small, forgotten village in Vermont where she had attempted to remain inconspicuous. She thought of the desolate nights in the vast penthouse, waiting for a husband who demonstrably did not care. She thought of the persistent fear she used to subsist with, and then she decisively let it all go. She opened her eyes and they were radiant with crystallized purpose. "Let us proceed immediately," Eleanor said. "I have several innovative ideas regarding the Berlin expansion." And that is the definitive way Julian Blackwood learned the harshest lesson of his life. Never fundamentally underestimate the quiet, unassuming individuals. He believed he was deliberately crushing a powerless, naive wife. But he was, in fact, violently awakening a formidable sleeping giant. Eleanor didn't merely secure her personal freedom. She reclaimed her fundamental identity and her rightful empire, conclusively demonstrating that quiet dignity and profound truth are the single most powerful weapons of all. She showed the watching world that while money can certainly purchase temporary silence, it can never secure genuine loyalty, and it absolutely cannot purchase immutable class. If you thoroughly enjoyed this narrative of supreme justice and karmic balance, please be sure to activate that like button. It provides essential support to help the channel, Ebon Stories, significantly expand. Do not neglect to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss a new compelling story. What is your considered opinion on Eleanor's revenge? Was it adequate? Or do you believe Julian Blackwood deserved a more severe, protracted consequence? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for viewing.